When we talk about the new wave of Florida rap, one name that always finds its way into the conversation is the YNW crew. A group of young artists filled with dreams of fame, loyalty, and money. But behind the music, there was a darker story waiting to unfold. At the heart of it all stands Cortland Henry, better known as YNW Bortlen. To the world, he was just the best friend and right-hand man of YNW Melly, a loyal figure who supported his team through thick and thin. But in late 2018, his name would become linked to one of the most shocking double murder cases in hip-hop history. Before the headlines, before the courtroom battles, there was just a crew of friends. YNW Melly, the star, with hits that captured the world's attention. YNW Juvie, the energetic soul of the group. YNW Sakasar, ambitious, talented, and always chasing the dream. And YNW Bortlen, the steady, loyal presence who often kept things in order. They weren't just rappers, they called themselves Young N***, a world. A brotherhood from Gifford, Florida, where life was tough, opportunities were scarce, and music was their escape. The group's chemistry was undeniable. They recorded music, traveled together, and lived the street lifestyle that inspired their lyrics. But like many rap crews before them, fame came with shadows, jealousy, pressure, and dangerous choices. It was supposed to be just another night, but on October 26, 2018, everything changed forever. According to police reports, YNW Bortlen was behind the wheel of a Jeep Compass, while YNW Melly sat as a passenger. With them were their two closest friends, Juvie and Sakasar. What happened during those crucial hours is still disputed. But what we know is this: by the end of the night, Juvie and Sakasar were dead. At 4:35 a.m., Bortlen drove into an emergency room in Miramar, Florida. The vehicle was riddled with bullet holes. In the back seat, the lifeless bodies of Juvie and Sakasar were found. Bortlen told authorities that the Jeep had been ambushed. In a drive-by shooting, he claimed that unknown gunmen sprayed the car with bullets, killing his friends instantly. It was a shocking story, but police would soon uncover details that made them question everything. At first, detectives treated it as a tragic gang-related shooting. Drive-bys were not unusual in South Florida, and rap crews often had enemies. But as investigators examined the scene, things didn't add up. Forensic analysis showed that the bullet trajectories didn't match an outside attack. Instead, the evidence suggested the shots came from inside the car itself. Even more suspicious was the way Bortlen and Melly allegedly staged the scene. Police later accused them of driving around with the bodies for hours, trying to come up with a cover story before arriving at the hospital. This was no longer just a tragedy. It was starting to look like a planned execution by early 2019. The investigation had turned its focus on both YNW Melly and YNW Bortlen. While Melly was accused of being the triggerman, Bortlen was charged as an accomplice, someone who helped carry out the crime and stage the scene afterward. Prosecutors painted him as the getaway driver, the one who knew exactly what had happened but tried to pass it off as a random act of violence. For fans of the YNW crew, the news was devastating. How could brothers, who once rapped about loyalty and family, end up destroying each other in such a brutal way? The investigation into the deaths of Juvie and Sakasar quickly became one of the most controversial cases in the hip-hop world. What started as a simple claim of a drive-by shooting began to unravel as detectives dug deeper. Police reports, ballistic evidence, and witness testimonies painted a far more complex picture. And slowly the narrative around YNW Bortlen and YNW Melly began to shift. Detectives noted that the bullet holes in the Jeep Compass did not align with an outside attack. The trajectory of the shots, combined with the blood splatter patterns inside the vehicle, suggested that the gunfire came from within. This revelation was critical. because it directly challenged the story Bortlen gave when he rushed his friends' bodies to the hospital. Investigators began to believe that the drive-by claim was a carefully staged cover, meant to throw them off the trail of what had really happened that night. Ballistics experts ran detailed tests. The patterns of entry wounds, the angles of the bullets, and the lack of shell casings at the supposed crime scene all indicated something was wrong. The vehicle itself told its own story, one that conflicted with the version Bortlen had delivered. Authorities also analyzed phone records, GPS data, and surveillance footage, piecing together a timeline that showed the crew driving around with the bodies for an extended period of time before reaching the hospital. To prosecutors, this was evidence of premeditation, not a panicked reaction. The charges against YNW Bortlen soon escalated, while prosecutors alleged that Melly was the shooter. They claimed Bortlen was instrumental in carrying out the plan and covering it up. In their view, he was more than just the driver. He was an accomplice who had knowingly participated in staging the crime. Court documents painted him as the person who tried to legitimize the story of a drive-by by presenting the car full of bullet holes and insisting that unknown attackers were responsible. The defense, however, told a very different story. Bortlen's legal team argued that he was not involved in any conspiracy or murder plot. They claimed he was simply trying to save the lives of his friends by getting them to the hospital as quickly as possible. To them, any inconsistencies in his account were the result of panic and shock, not guilt. They maintained that there was no concrete evidence placing him as a willing participant in the murders, and that the state's case was built on speculation rather than hard proof. Meanwhile, the case captured the attention of fans and the media alike. The idea that two young rappers had been killed by their own friends stunned the hip-hop community. Social media exploded with debates, conspiracy theories, and arguments about loyalty, jealousy, and fame. Some fans refused to believe that Bortlen and Melly could have betrayed their crew. Others pointed to the forensic evidence as undeniable, proof that something sinister had happened within the car. The tension between these two sides fueled even more publicity, keeping the case in the headlines for months on end. Investigators continued to gather evidence. Testimonies from forensic experts became a central part of the prosecution's argument. Reports claimed that the bullet trajectories were consistent with shots fired from the left rear passenger side of the car, where Melly was allegedly seated. This detail reinforced the accusation that the story of a random ambush was false. Authorities also emphasized that the bodies of Juvie and Sakasar had been driven around before being brought to the hospital, suggesting time was spent planning how to explain the deaths. For Bortlen, this meant his role was under constant scrutiny. Prosecutors labeled him as the fixer, the one who helped design the false drive-by story and executed it by showing up at the hospital with a rehearsed explanation. The defense pushed back, saying he was being unfairly targeted simply because of his association with Melly. They argued that loyalty to a friend should not be mistaken for participation in murder. The second phase of this story is a legal chess game, where every piece of evidence is challenged and every testimony is dissected. On one side, prosecutors built a case of betrayal and premeditated killing. On the other hand, the defense insisted this was a tragic misunderstanding amplified by flawed interpretation of forensic science. As the investigation pressed forward, one question remained at the center of it all. Was YNW Bortlen a loyal friend, caught in a nightmare he could not control? Or was he a key player in one of hip-hop's darkest tragedies? The answer would only begin to take shape once the case entered the courtroom, where the fight for truth, freedom, and justice would reach its most intense stage. The courtroom became the stage where the entire story of the YNW crew was dissected piece by piece. Every detail of that night, every phone call, every bullet hole was placed under a microscope as prosecutors and defense attorneys battled for control of the narrative. For YNW Bortlen, this was not just about clearing his name. It was about survival, as the charges against him carried the weight of decades behind bars. Prosecutors argued with intensity. They told the jury that the evidence left no room for doubt. They presented forensic reports, cell phone data, and surveillance footage, weaving together a timeline that placed YNW Melly as the shooter and Bortlen as the driver who carried out the cover-up. They emphasized that the car had been driven around 4 hours before arriving at the hospital, a decision that could not be explained away as panic. To them, this was calculated behavior, proof of guilt and betrayal of the very men they called brothers. The defense countered with a simple but powerful claim. The state's story was built on speculation. They attacked the reliability of the forensic evidence, questioning whether bullet trajectories could truly prove where the shots came from. They reminded the court that Bortlen had been the one to bring his friends to the hospital in the first place, something a guilty man might not do. They painted him not as a criminal mastermind, but as a man caught in a nightmare, trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. Outside the courtroom, the case was being fought on another battlefield, the court of public opinion. Fans debated endlessly on social media. Some saw Bortlen as a loyal friend, a scapegoat being dragged down because of his association with Melly. Others believed the prosecution's story, convinced that fame, jealousy, and greed had poisoned the YNW Brotherhood from the inside. The hip-hop community itself was divided, with some artists calling for justice for Juvie and Sakasar, while others stood by Melly and Bortlen, preaching loyalty until the very end. The media amplified the spectacle, turning every hearing into a headline and every court date into breaking news. The story wasn't just about music anymore. It was about crime, loyalty, betrayal, and the fragile line between fame and downfall. Documentaries, podcasts, and YouTube breakdowns kept the narrative alive, ensuring that YNW Bortlen's name would be tied to this case forever, no matter the outcome. Years passed, and delays in the legal process only fueled more speculation. Each time the trial was postponed, each time new evidence surfaced, fans and critics alike tried to piece together the puzzle themselves. For the families of Juvie and Sakasar, the wait was agonizing. They wanted closure, justice for their sons, and an end to the endless cycle of speculation. For Bortlen, the wait meant living in limbo, caught between hope and fear, his future hanging on the edge of a judge's gavel. The truth, however, remains complicated. In cases like these, the courtroom does not always deliver clarity. It delivers verdicts. Forensic evidence may suggest one story, testimonies may suggest another, and the jury is left to decide what version of the truth they believe. For YNW Bortlen, that means the question that has haunted him since that night in 2018 still lingers. Was he a victim of circumstance, or was he an active participant in betrayal? The saga of YNW Bortlen's double murder investigation is more than just a story about a crime. It is about the fragile nature of trust, the weight of loyalty, and the devastating consequences when brotherhood is broken. It shows how quickly fame can turn into infamy, how one night can destroy everything built over years, and how the search for truth can stretch on endlessly when lives are lost and stories conflict. In the end, what really happened inside that Jeep may never be fully understood by the public. The only people who truly know are the ones who are there, and two of them can no longer speak. The courts will decide what evidence is strong enough, what testimony is credible enough, and what punishment is fitting. But for the fans, the families, and for hip-hop itself, the scars of that night will never fully fade. And so, the question remains as haunting today as it was the morning after the tragedy. What really happened inside that car? And what is the truth behind YNW Bortlen's double murder investigation?